Howdy hackers, and welcome to the next episode of FairLight TV. I'm Pontus Bacchus Berg, and today we will be talking about IFFL, one of those crazy acronyms that people tended to allocate to one of the phenomena on the C64, and yeah, it's the prevailing way to describe some sort of file linking. And this is building on some information that you should have from a previous episode on the sector structure of the C64 disk drives. So the allocation of disk is static. The sectors have a fixed size of 256 bytes. So even if you store just a little bit of data, that means that you are allocating a full sector. That is the key information to bring forward here. So when cracking, there has been sort of two lines of competition. One is cracking fast. Releasing the first release is the only valid release. If you are doing the second one, it counts for nothing. Nobody cares about number two. But there has also been a line of competition amongst crackers where you should crack good. There was a specific publication for this called the Gamer's Guide, hosted by Triad, where all the versions of the individual cracks were listed and they were compared, and you can actually be considered the best crack due to the fewest number of blocks, best trainers, bringing all the data with it, like a loading screen and documentation and what have you not. So there was a very good reason, if you wanted to score high in Gamer's Guide, to ensure that the number of files were kept down and the number of blocks was also kept down. But of course not sacrificing bringing the loading picture and all of that to the game. But so the smaller crack was seen as the better, and the fewer files was also seen as the better one. This is of course only valid for what we're talking about here will be valid only for multi-level games, because the other ones would just have one file, and of course that needed to be short, but it's only one file. So we are assuming that you are releasing here a game that has multiple files. So every sector is 256 bytes. But that means that statistically, 128 bytes of the last sector is wasted. Statistically, you fill a random number of bytes, and statistically, it would be half. So every time you have a game that has more than one file, so for every 2 files, you are basically losing a sector. So one of the techniques that was invented for ensuring you would use as few blocks as possible, heavier or being more efficient in your utilization of the disk space, was IFFL. So that means that you're linking the files of your game into one bigger file. So what you see on the disk is one big file, or at least several bigger files, rather than small segments. The first generation of IFFL was just linking all the segments of one particular level into one file. So let's say you had a file level 1. It contains new graphics, new background, new music, new whatever. And those were different segments, all of them. Merging all of those together, you could just keep looping until you have loaded all the segments and you actually reach the end of file, rather than having one segment per file. So there you saved a number of blocks based on this, and if this was crucial for being 3 or 4 blocks shorter for being considered the best one, then you've chosen a very good strategy by linking your files. I don't have any name for who actually invented it. Us in FairLight, we used it quite early, I would say. Golem used it in many of his really, really early cracks. When people talk about IFFL, they tend to associate the term with Genesis Project, because Genesis Project was the group that actually coined the IFFL acronym. That is not the same thing as they invented file linking. That had been done for years before them. But hands down, well, or hands up, they were really good with their marketing. So out there are a number of people who still think that Genesis Project invented IFFL. They very much did not. And also, even if you have the technology of file linking, that doesn't mean that you're making the shortest crack. If you look at the Genesis project of Forgotten World, which was the first one, and they are very boasting about that one, and if you see the interviews with Snacky, he's absolutely sure that that was a perfect crack, and his IFFL was doing that for him. Thing is that Mega Snail of NATO did a shorter crack than Snacky did of the very same game without doing any sort of file linking. So there are more tricks to providing a short crack than just using IFFL. But this is the first generation, merging segments that you are loading at a particular time. So you're loading all of the segments of level 1. But that's not random access. If you want full random access where you can access any segment at any point in time, like you are accessing files, then you need to do something else. And IFFL sort of generation 2 was sort of what addressed the need for the total random access. Then you put all the segments in the same file. Of course, you need some sort of boot file that contains the actual logic, but all the data could be in one consistent and merged IFFL file. You would see cracks with only 2 files. They are, if they are multi-loaders, it's very, very likely that is an IFFL, because that is how they would look normally. So the first thing that happens is that the game or the cracker throws into the drive memory a scanner routine. That scanner routine then traverses the IFFL file and logs the track sector and offset where in the big file the different segments are. And why do this? Well, if you have those files, you can file copy them. That means that the track and sector cannot be taken for granted. Depending on if you have copied it or not, the track and sector would be different per disk. So that's why you need to scan. And again, you have 2 Ks of memory in the C64 disk drive. That's really, really little. So there are very hard constraints on the number of files you can support in an IFFL file. You can, of course, handle more than 144 if you have an efficiently written piece of drive code. But I mean, when you are exceeding 256, that means that you need to have longer indexes, and that's probably when you run into problems. So I've seen very few IFFLs that support more than 256 files. So what is the merit of this IFFL thing? Well, first of all, it's shorter. That is for sure. It should be shorter than a comparable crack not using IFFL, because you would use the space on the disk fully efficiently. You would also have the advantage of a cleaner directory. It's always nice to have only 2 files. For me, those are very minor advantages. The practical advantage that is still there is that if you want to load, let's say, file number 100 and 101, if you're using a normal disk, the search for the disk will take the first directory sector, first 8 files. It's not there. And then it will traverse until it will find file number 100, which is on a sector very, very far into the directory. That actual search is reduced totally with IFFL, because IFFL goes directly to the track and sector and offset and loads the relevant segment for you. No scanning or traversing the directory to find the relevant file. Any drawbacks with IFFL? Yes, for sure, because you're populating the disk drive with code, and that needs to be different depending on all the different disk drives supported. So it's not necessarily so that you support all the disk drives. Is your code relevant for 1541? Yes, it is, but let's assume you also want to load from 1571, which is not 100% compatible. 1581, totally different drive mechanics, and logic is also very different. Then your code needs to accommodate for that as well. So if you want to really ensure that you support all the drives, that is some complex IFFL disk drive routine coding there. And also, if you want to support something like the SD to IEC, then you don't have any logic. So there is no drive memory that you can upload your IFFL code to. So IFFL doesn't work. Then you need to make all of that in the computer. And now we're running into a very, very tricky situation if you want to do things really compatible. It's messy. The other really big drawback is supporting save routines. If you want to save a high score or save wherever the position inside the game, or whatever the game has some sort of need for saving, where do you save it? Well, there are options of saving it into the IFFL file, but that takes additional code, of course, into this already complex and very, very compact piece of code you have in your disk drive. And it's still not really compatible. You want your save states to be outside in the normal file system, but then you need to support the full file system. And now you're running into absolutely big constraints of the memory storage in the disk drive. It's just 2K. And if you're also going to have a table of track sector and offset of, let's say, 200 files, a lot of that is chewed up by the actual tables. So yes, let's see on the list that I've remembered to say all of those things. Oh yeah, so let's still assume that you want to go for IFFL and you really want to make the shortest crack. Big thumbs ups for you. That's a very, very good competition. You should really make the good crack, not the fast crack. But then you save like 20 blocks and then you add an intro which is like 70 blocks. Where is the logic in that? Are you saving 20 blocks? You're taking on the massive hassle of implementing an IFFL that works and that is very, very compatible across drives. And then you're wasting all of that gain by adding an ugly big intro. You missed it. That's not how you're supposed to do it. It needs to be very small if you want to ensure that you actually benefited with a short crack from all of those efforts. So, is IFFL timely? I personally don't use it anymore because, again, there is no gamer's guide. Whenever there is a new gamer's guide that also compares the size of cracks, that's when I will be starting using IFFL again. Currently, I'm using a normal track loader that's not going to use any file linking. I could use the first generation of file linking, but this second generation of file linking where you also need to have something that scans in the disk drive. Sorry, for me that's history. I will use it whenever Gamer's Guide is back. So try it, bring back Gamer's Guide, and I might consider it. So thank you for listening, and also ensure that you press subscribe and press the bell button, and looking forward to seeing you again in the next episode of FairLight TV.